So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited about sharing something very interesting with you today. Now, normally, AssetMap has a feature or product releases every 2 weeks. So clearly, we're not going to waste your time every 2 weeks telling you about what's new on AssetMap. But we thought this is something slightly different, and we think it's worth sharing it. Obviously that you know what's going on at AssetMap, but I think more broadly that you understand what's happening in the world of technology globally. All right, so Kirsty, if you can go to that first slide, please. Now, just to introduce the thinking behind this is, if it's, and I'm sure it's clear to everyone, is we really in the business of helping clients make decisions. Now, and what we've seen is those decisions can range from, and on that scale, we call it from simple to complex, and from a decision that's got a low cost of being wrong to something that can be very expensive for clients. Okay, so in other words, take a practical example. You know, I've got a surplus money in my bank account and I'll put it into a money market fund. Really not very complex, and the probability or the cost of being wrong is minimal. I might pay a slightly higher management fee. But then there are stuff that's more complex, and the cost for the client of being wrong is enormous. And that's really where what we call our advisor intelligence, that's really where we shine, you know, where we earn our living. So what our thinking is that more and more on the stuff that's simpler and where the cost of being wrong is low, we're going to have more and more technology helping clients with those decisions. And of course, where it's the other side of that line, that's where you know, more and more advisors are going to play. So the thing we want to just say here is and we think with signals, this line has gone up, and it'll continue to creep up. And so it just means if we want to make our practices sustainable in the long run, we have to focus less on the stuff below the line and more on the stuff above the line. So if we go to that next slide, Kirsty, and I mean, this is, I'm sure you all know the iceberg analogy. So what's really visible about AssetMap is, you know, those things we call simplicity, you know, one-page financial plan, it's visual. Those are the things that's obvious when you look at AssetMap, yeah, I mean, clients see that as well. But the impact in a practice is slightly different, and that's not so obvious. And so the way what we see in practice happening, you know, with financial planners and their client relationships, the more they focus on presenting things in a simple way, the more their clients start engaging with them, the client's understanding increases. The focus is much more on value-adding conversations. We talk about, we want to spend our time intentionally with clients. And then you get into stuff like, you know, we call it reality planning, or if you don't know what that is, you must listen to a podcast from Carl Richards and Louis. Louis on XY Advisors posted it, I think, yesterday or the day before. And so you can just see the direction where this is going. More and more, that once-off engagement with clients, you know, where we try and sort everything out, is shifting towards how do we add value on an ongoing basis to clients. So we're going to show you a little bit today how Signals does this. And the trick here to understand is we're not trying to show you how a computer works. We're trying to show you how that'll enable advisors to focus more on their client conversations. All right, so Kirsty, you can take us away.
Thanks, Benny. So the big idea, like Benny said, we really understand the importance of client conversations. You know, it's in these engagements with clients that they feel informed and equipped to make the decisions that move them forward. But it's also in these client conversations that clients experience the value we as financial planners add. So the big idea around Signals is, can we apply the AssetMap philosophy of simple rich to interpret a household's financial data? And we can't talk about signals without first starting with what we call the 6Ls, or the financial fire drill framework. Now, this framework is inspired by fire drills, and I know I've experienced my fair share of fire drills. I'm sure all of you on the call have too. But underneath it, the purpose of a fire drill is about understanding if something goes wrong. Does everyone know what the plan is? Does everyone know what steps to take, what the process is going to be, and who to call for support? The thinking behind this framework is, can we take that same thinking of a fire drill and apply it to financial planning? So these 6Ls talk to the 6 events that could potentially derail a household's financial situation. I'm going to work through them quickly here. So it starts with liquidity, and that really speaks to, should the family require funding quickly? And I think this is a need we can all, relate to a lot more, having gone through, a global pandemic. But what is the plan for this family should there be a liquidity event? Is there emergency funding? Is there cheap debt that the client could access? Is there family that could support in that situation? But the idea behind this framework is to work through each of these with the client to unpack that. The next one is long-term disability. If someone in the household became disabled, what impact would that have on the family, on the financial situation? Could we sustain that? What about a loss of life in the family? Or if someone were to get ill, get cancer, what is the impact of that? Longevity, is there enough savings to sustain our lifestyle in retirement, even if we live longer than expected? And the last L, legacy. Is there a plan in place to achieve the legacy this client wants to achieve? Is the will in place? If there's trust required, is that in place? So again, if we think about this as a framework, I know as a financial planner, you can look at an asset map or a client's financial circumstances, and you'll quickly be able to spot there's a gap or this is potentially not sustainable. But the purpose of this framework is to enable that conversation with the clients. It's a framework we can use to talk through and say, let's make sure that everyone in the family, that we're all on the same page and we know what is the plan in the event of these things, if one of these things should happen. And if it's not on track, how do we make sure that it is on track? Okay. So let's take a look at this client's household. So here we have the Jetsons, we've got Neil and Lauren. I'm going to take a look at their current picture. So we can see Neil's earning an income. He's also got a rental income that he's receiving. He's built up some retirement funds, some discretionary funding, a couple of loans. And on this side, we can see that Lauren's also built up retirement funding, student loans, and some discretionary investments. Together, they have property and loans, as well as some insurance in place in the event of death and disability. So we asked ourselves, can we take this information that we're seeing on this picture and create a predictive model that would inform the household's ability to financially weather those 6 events? And that is how Signals was created. So Signals looks at the client's ages, their incomes, their investments that they've built up, their retirement funds, their assets, liabilities, and insurance. And it applies algorithms to tell the client and the household whether they are red, amber, or green across these 6 events. And again, the purpose of that is to almost hold a mirror to the client to say, this is what it's telling us, but gain permission to delve deeper and say, let's unpack your unique circumstances and understand what the signal is telling us and what we need to put in place to make sure you're on track should the family, one of these events happen. So without further ado, let's take a look at a live example. So here we have the Josephs. I've also kept it quite high level for this example. So we can see in the middle here, we've got Kyle and Mary. We can see Kyle's earning an income, Mary's earning an income. They've built up some protection, in terms of death, disability, critical illness. They're contributing towards retirement funding, and they've got some discretionary savings built up as well. Here we can see it on this side for Kyle and over here for Mary. At the bottom, we can see that together they've got a home and a bond in place already. So can we take this information, apply those algorithms, and determine whether the client is red, amber, or green? On the left here, you'll see there's a new icon now. If I click on that, it's going to apply that algorithm and show me for this family, based on that information, whether they're amber, green, or red. So we can see here that for liquidity, the model is telling us that while there is some provision for that, it may not be sufficient. So it's showing up as amber. We can see in long-term disability is green, showing that it's probably well-funded. Loss of life is showing as red. So that gives us that warning sign. Here we need to go look a little bit into this, unpack that a bit more, and understand why that signal is showing up as red. Also, we can see that long-term care is showing as green, longevity and legal liability is showing as red. Now, again, just because it's green doesn't mean it's perfect, and red doesn't mean that there's nothing in place there. It's just getting that permission to say to the client, look, this, based on everything we know about you, this is what it's telling us. Let's unpack that further and get that permission to delve deeper with the client, but also to just open up a conversation around these 6 events. So for example, here in this, Ben, you want to add?
Can I just pause you there for a second, in case it's not obvious to everybody today?
Yeah.
First, you didn't do any calculations here. This is literally from a client entering their data in a wizard or somewhere. They'll enter their data and this generates. Okay, so it means that in future, and we think this will become more and more prevalent, clients will be able to enter their data somewhere on the internet and it'll start generating effectively all these things that represent a holistic financial plan. So I think it's just worth bearing in mind, it doesn't have to be the planner that enters this data.
Yes, so you can have clients enter it, and yes, it's taking the data from this picture and applying those algorithms and creating this phase. But what this does is open the door to have further conversations. So for example, if I'm going to focus on loss of life today, I can click on the details. It'll tell me a little bit about how it's calculating, but also some considerations to think about. So what it's looking at and what to consider. But most importantly, I can then run a target map in the event of loss of life. And this gives me the ability to say, we know what the algorithm is saying, let's look at your specific circumstances. So I'm going to run that for Kyle and Mary today. So I'm going to run it for both of them and press create. Okay, let's give it a second. So what that's doing now is you can see now I've got a target map in the event of Kyle's death and in the event of Mary's death. And you'll see it automatically gives me a percentage funded. And we can see why the signal was showing up as red. But now I can unpack that. So I can open up this one for Kyle, and you'll see it starts with, what do you want? So in this example, the settings in the model is showing that if something were to happen to Kyle, this family would require 70% of what Kyle's earning now, from now until Kyle would have been 90, increasing by a cost of living adjustment or inflation of 6. It's also saying, let's make sure that if something were to happen to Kyle, we could cover any debt that's sitting inside of the household, have some funding for final expenses, and some funding for any emergencies in that first year. Now, this is just a starting point. You would now edit it and tailor it based on what this client's unique requirements are in the event of death. So for example, I could say to Kyle, what income would your family require should something happen to you? And maybe Kyle says, they would need 600,000 a year and for this period. Or maybe it says, 30,000 a month or 360,000 a year is what they would require. Then I can edit it. I can also untick any of these if they're not applicable for this particular client, and I could add any additional desired needs that this family has that's unique to them. Once we've done that, we then look at, well, what does this client have in place already that could be used to fund that need in the event of Kyle's death? So we can see at the bottom here, Kyle's got group life cover to the value of 3 million. That's been allocated. But Kyle also has some savings and investments that could be used to fund the income requirements and the needs of the family in the event of his death. So then I can allocate them to this goal. So here I can tick Kyle's savings. He also has a pension preserver that I can allocate. as well as an employer fund. Now we can see the model showing us that based on the requirements that they have in the event of Carl's death and what they have already, we can see that they're 45% funded towards this goal, and they would need another approximately 7 million in order to be 100% funded. Now, I know at this point you would work through different options with the client. You could redefine what they need. We could look at allocating other investments. For the purpose of this illustration, I'm going to assume that the option we choose is additional life cover. So now I can pop back into Asset Map, and let's assume that we're proposing additional life cover for Kyle in the event of death. So here I'm going to say it's for Kyle. Let's propose life cover. And we're going to say it's 7 million. There we go. And I'm going to create that. It'll pop up now on the asset map to show that's what I'm proposing in the event of death. And I can go back into that target map now and allocate that proposed 7 million to show the impact on this loss of life target map. So now we can see that Carl's just about 100% funded, sitting at 99. I can now do the exact same process for Mary. So you can say, let's unpack what the family would need in the event of Mary's death. Let's add what Mary has already that could be used to fund those needs. So we've allocated her life cover. We can then also allocate that Mary has this tax-free savings investment, as well as this retirement annuity. And again, we can see Mary is about 39% funded. And for the purpose of this illustration, I'm going to also propose 7 million in additional cover for Mary. So I'll pop back into Asset Map. I'm going to add that proposed cover for Mary this time. Okay, and let's say that's also 7 million. And now I can go back into Mary's target map and allocate that proposed life cover to again show her the impact of that decision. Okay, so I select that, and she's about 98% funded. Now, because I've added those proposed life covers, I can now go back into signals, and we can see that signal has changed from red to green because of what we're implementing. So now you can just get a sense of how that conversation flows. We start by saying, this is where you are today. This is everything you have. Let's have a look at what the signals are telling us about where there's potentially a warning sign. Let's delve into the target maps for those particular events and unpack it based on tailoring it to your unique circumstances and see how on track are you and what are the steps that we're going to take to make sure you are on track. And for today, I just focused on loss of life, but of course you can run these for disability, long-term care. So, if there were to be a critical illness, education, retirement, or any custom particular goals that this particular household has. And it'll create these as well. And you could unpack again, what would this client require? What do they have in place already? And how do we ensure that this client is on track and is taking the steps to move forward along these bars? Okay. And then if I just flip into what a report would then look like, so I can generate a report showing client, this is your picture of where you are today. This is the signal showing how on track you are, or whether it's red, green, or amber across those 6 events. And I can show on a one-page summary how on track the client is against all these different events happening and the goals that they have. And then it'll break that down into a bit more detail so I can see exactly what the needs are, what we've allocated, and what that means for the client. All right, Benny, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Awesome, Kirsty. Thanks for that. I know everybody, just to put this in perspective, I think everybody on the call have seen some very basic, what we call robos, like those things where it shows, employee, whether their pension fund is red, orange, or green, or something very simplistic. I want to invest, high or medium or low risk investment. I think everybody's seen those. As far as we know, we believe this is the first in the world of these types of indicators across all aspects of a client's financial plan, or all the key areas of a financial plan. And so we think it's quite novel, and but no doubt, you know, I mean, and yes, we took about 6 months, mostly Kirsty, trying to convert all the algorithms from the United States to South Africa. But the point is, it also didn't take 3 years. And so we think there's going to be lots and lots more of these tools that start popping up, some through your typical CRM and F&A type providers, but some could be directly to clients. So I think it's worth everybody's while just to reflect on, what does that mean for my practice? Where do I add value? And more importantly, where do my clients believe I add value? Because, you know, what you think the value that you're adding and what clients perceive it to might be very different. So we certainly think, and obviously we think Asset Map is the easiest and the simplest way to do that. But whichever tools you use, I think the important thing for the future is to start really thinking about, how do clients perceive my value? Yeah, so we enjoy always pushing the boundaries and you know, helping advisors do better for their clients. And we hope everybody enjoyed the session. I saw there were a few questions. Yeah, there was a, please share the video. We will certainly do that afterwards. Yeah, there was like one or two technical questions as well. Here's another one, tax liabilities. Yes, absolutely, Barry. You know, tax is factored in. Because I mean, that's an important thing. The interesting thing is the way Asset Map thinks about tax is that it's also an opportunity to have a conversation with a client to show your value. So the way that tax works is in a way that you can model it with a client, as opposed to sometimes we do it in the back office, or it's like a black box and you don't really know where the tax numbers come from. Asset Map allows us to have a conversation around tax because we think it's really important for clients, and it's an important part of our value add that we think about tax, the tax impact on clients. Yeah, anything else? I'm trying to think, Gary, did you mention, I'm sorry, did you spot anything else?
No, Benny, I think you've dealt with it all. So it's
all right, excellent.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Really appreciate your time. And maybe